I am generally of the opinion that all art has a right to exist. That doesn't mean all art is harmless, though. Hey there, folks. So, I am several years late to the 50 Shades of Grey conversation. And the thing is, I'm not really going to be dissecting the work because, well, far bigger YouTubers than I picked that carcass clean a while ago and made some really great videos as a result of it in some cases. And you can feel free to seek those out. But I still found myself thinking about it. And it led me down a very specific thought path that I feel like I want to share because it kind of rhymes with some of the videos I've been putting out lately. The main ones being the one about how the contents of an artist's work should not be the sole measure that you use to try and determine what an artist believes, as well as my video on your media tastes not being the same as your morals, and the two are not required to line up. And now, well, okay, we'll get to 50 Shades. But we're going to circle the block a few times first. What got me thinking about this was an odd little moment that happened during a gaming stream. If you didn't know, on my secondary channel, Break Room of Geeks, I stream most Wednesdays and Fridays. And on the day that I am recording this, I streamed a bit of the game Cult of the Lamb. Now, if you don't know that game, it is part 2D Zelda-esque dungeon crawling and part cult and base management. Yes, cult management. You are literally managing a cult. So you have to build things up, make sure everybody's needs are met, and do what you can to get your followers to give you the results that you need to progress in the game. It has a cheeky and at times crass sense of humor. It is not limited to the fact that you are serving a demonic being. There is some there's some tasteless stuff, but if you can get on its wavelength, it's a fun game. I haven't beaten it at time of recording, but I'm enjoying it. There was a moment that sparked a conversation in the chat. I am not going to say explicitly what it is that happened in the game because I think I risk demonetization by doing that.
You're a freaky little guy, you are.
But to be broad about it, there was one of my followers who expressed something that I'm not going to say it was expressed as a kink within the context of the game, but what he expressed that he wanted is definitely something that is a kink that some people have. And it kind of sparked a little bit of conversation in the chat and me interacting with the chat, partially because the kink in question is one of my hard limits, and I don't have a particularly long list of those, but this was definitely on it. It didn't turn me off the game. It was a silly moment. It presented in a silly manner, but it did kind of make me go, oh, all right. But it kind of brought out a general conversation about kink in the chat, and I was breaking from the game now and then to check the chat and interacting with them, and we started talking about some of the notions and the concepts of hazardous kinks. The thing is, to even deal with that notion, we kind of actually need to separate out the two halves that frequently get shoved together when we use the term kink. Because when people talk about kink or kinks, they are often conflating two related things under one word: the desire and the practice. So the desire is whatever impulse it is you have, whatever thing or notion that you are trying to fulfill, that desire, that need, that want that you feel. The practice is whatever you choose to do to engage with that desire and find a way to try and fulfill it. Now, as I said, oftentimes when people discuss kinks, they kind of lump those two together. I want to separate them for the moment because when discussing a concept like dangerous kinks, I think it is very important to distinguish dangerous practice from one's desires, because many desires, kinks or not, could be potentially hazardous. Whether or not they actually become so depends on if and how you act on them. If you've ever had a voice say something in your head that in the moment you're like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. Okay. You've resisted an impulse or a desire that may have been momentary, but also was probably a bad idea. I don't mean to break it down to something as oversimplified as impulse control, but there is a process by which your desire becomes your practice. And broadly speaking, I try very hard to not get in the habit of policing desires. That gets into thought policing, and it's just not something that I feel comfortable engaging with. Some people will, possibly unwittingly, because they will make those broad generalizations of saying this is a dangerous kink, when usually what they're actually talking about is the practice. Because there are some kinks, well, even ones where the desire is not particularly harmful in and of itself, but there are some things that the way you choose to engage with it could be potentially very hazardous. This is going to be the aspect that's going to tie into 50 Shades of Grey, but hold on, we're not done circling the block yet. To put it in very simplified terms with a very common thing that one sees in BDSM and kink circles, let's go briefly with ropes and restraint. The act of one person tying up and restraining another person. Now, talking for a moment about the restrain-y end of that, the desires that it might be fulfilling are numerous. A desire to feel controlled, a desire to feel owned, a desire to feel powerless. Because yes, those and many other things can be very enticing emotions for people to engage in. How one practices that is where it becomes a hazardous or not hazardous thing. Because a general desire like those, not innately hazardous. Even rope itself as a practice and restraints in general can absolutely be practiced safely with a partner who you have an understanding with, who you feel comfortable with, who knows what they're doing, especially when you're dealing with rope. Because if you don't know what you're doing, you can cut off circulation, you can give rope burn, you can cause people to be stuck in positions where they start getting cramps or other issues, and it can be unsafe. But if the practice is unsafe, that is an issue with the practice, not with the desire that it stems from. And that is why, for the moment, I really want to keep these two things separate. Because within the realm of thought and desire, that is where kinks are born. But it is in the realm of practice where they are brought to life. Now, this is where we're going to broach some of the more contentious or controversial kinks. The one that tends to come up most frequently, though far from the only one, would be CNC, which stands for consensual non-consent. Now, that practice, done safely, because it can be, is a situation where two people will come to an agreement that when they begin the scene, they will act as if there is no consent between them, and one of them will physically dominate and be forceful with the other. But this is something that has been agreed to and consented to prior to the scene beginning. And also, this is always important, can be stopped at any moment with the use of a safe word. Now, the desire that is fulfilling, it can be similar to some of the stuff that I listed under rope, a sense of being overpowered. Some people flatly desire to be treated roughly within a safe setting. Now, the unsafe practice would be to simply put yourself in a circumstance where you are at the whims of someone who is doing that to you, not as part of a scene, but legitimately. That is the importance of kink as a community, because it is within the community that you can enforce best practices. It's people who just say, oh yeah, I'm into this stuff, but have no basis by which they understand or have ever learned the best ways to practice it, and they just wing it. That's where legitimate harm can happen. But again, bad practice isn't the fault of the desires. Why do I bring this up in regards to 50 Shades of Grey? Let's start with the fact, this is not a particularly hot take, that it's a bad book. And I don't just mean in terms of the raw nuts and bolts of writing, grammar, characterization, progression of narrative, etc. It is bad at those things. Now, I guess for clarity, I haven't read the whole thing myself. I did see the first movie. I have had that experience, but I've had a fair amount of secondary experience with the book, not just from taking in video essays and things of that nature, but also from having been close with someone who read it and basically decided that every time they read something that they thought was the worst thing they'd ever read, would read me that passage, which meant I heard about half the book read out to me. So I do have some understanding. I do feel confident in saying it is a badly written book, but that's not what I'm dealing with. Because there is concern, especially within the BDSM community, that it is legitimately a harmful and hazardous book. Because what it depicts isn't really kink. It's certainly not well-practiced kink. It's not really BDSM. What it is abuse. Because I think I am prepared to adopt the stance that once it has exited the realm of safe practice, it's no longer kink, it's abuse. And in the case of 50 Shades of Grey, if you aren't excessively familiar, some examples of that would include Christian Grey failing to give full and proper descriptions of devices, toys, or activities he intends to engage with Anastasia, thereby robbing her of the ability to give properly informed consent.
Now you know what those silver balls do.
Plying her with alcohol during the period when they are negotiating what events can or can't happen to her. Shaming her for using her safe word when a scene exceeds her personal threshold for comfort. Using what should be fun punishment as legitimate punishment and a means to take out his actual anger upon her body. All of this and more are examples of actual abusive practice that Christian Grey engages with against Anastasia Steele. And as a result, this book, the best known and most popular and most widely read piece of BDSM fiction in the world, is despised by the vast majority of the BDSM and kink communities because of what a horrifying representation of their lifestyle it is. Here's the thing, though. How much of a problem is that? I'm not actually saying it isn't a problem, but let's ask the question. How much of a problem is that actually? Because, let's be honest, plenty of books, novels, especially TV shows, depict unhealthy, toxic, or otherwise bad relationship dynamics. Many classic romances do this. Oftentimes, if the main complication that makes it difficult for the romantic leads to be together isn't logistical, meaning some outside force trying to keep them apart, like, say, the families in Romeo and Juliet, if it's not that and you're just dealing with the internal mechanics of the relationship, oftentimes there will be a toxic, unhealthy aspect to that relationship. Some romances will tell a story where they make each other better and overcome their faults and their issues and their bad habits to be better, and some will tell stories where they ultimately break apart because they cannot reconcile the problems. But there's plenty of romance out there that depicts, strictly speaking, bad relationships, at least for a portion of the time that the story is being told. So why is the notion of just bad practice such a sticking point for 50 Shades of Grey? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Let's address the elephant in the room and deal with the fact that the original author, who goes by the pen name E.L. James, has no idea what she's talking about. Even if you know nothing else about her, it is immensely clear from reading it, if you know almost anything about BDSM and kink practices and communities, that she doesn't have the first clue what she's talking about. She wrote about something that she finds enticing, but knows nothing about, has not experienced, and didn't research. And to be clear, it's her right to do that, but it does explain a whole bunch of the problems. The books failed to distinguish between abuse dynamics and kink dynamics because the author does too. So that is absolutely a problem, and it's one I don't want to dwell on because honestly, I want to deal with the work itself. And kind of as I talked about in that video about how you can't read the author just by reading the art, let's for the moment assume that we don't know a bunch of stuff about E.L. James and how she claims it is not an abusive dynamic that she wrote. She is wrong about that, but she does claim that. So let's for the moment, just set her aside completely. Because ultimately, if all you had was the end product, you would have no way of knowing if it ended up this way out of ignorance or because the author was intrigued by abuse dynamics and understood that was what she was doing and wanted to explore that in narrative form. Again, not what happened, but going by the work alone, you won't be able to tell. So with E.L. James discarded, what is it about 50 Shades of Grey that has the community so up in arms that makes them say flat out, it's dangerous and hazardous? Well, it's the audience. Because the thing is, if this book and others like it was read only within BDSM and kink circles, well, first of all, most of them wouldn't like it, and they don't, but they would also understand that, okay, this is not an example of good practice. So if I get enjoyment out of this, it's not because I should want to emulate this. It's because it does something for me, but I can do that while recognizing there's still issues. This is sort of one of the things I talked about in the video about how your media diet is not your morals. It is okay not only to take in work that has problematic elements, it is okay even to enjoy the problematic elements in specific. What you need to try and do, though, is be sure you don't defend those to somebody who takes issue with them, and to understand that while you may enjoy them within this context, that doesn't mean that you should necessarily defend them or that they are a thing that is good in the broad sense of existing in reality as opposed to entertainment. And that is always what I encourage people, is to have that understanding. You can like problematic media. Don't pretend it doesn't have the problems, is generally the way that I approach that. And nobody f***ing dare bring up J.K. Rowling into this conversation. You can go back to the Your Media Diet is Not Your Morals video. I address why she breaks this conversation. So don't extrapolate what I just said and apply it to her. All right? Anyways, coming back to it, liking problematic media is fine, but I always encourage people to understand what the problems are, be aware of them, but they also don't require you to stop engaging with the piece of media. It's literacy that I'm always pushing for, not simply labeling thing bad because problematic. And so with something like 50 Shades of Grey, I can look at it, and I do believe it is bad, and it is problematic for a lot of reasons, but the thing is, again, if it was read by people within the BDSM community, they would recognize that. But it went mainstream, which means it was being read by people who didn't have the background and understanding to recognize that that's not safe practice, that's abuse. I'm going to make a comparison that I'm going to have to defend a little bit, I know. But I'm going to make it anyway. There is a reason that certain kinds of entertainment are not okay to show to a child. Now, exactly what kinds of entertainment, exactly where you draw those lines, exactly what ages you show what to what children, I'm not dealing with any of that because, wow, will we never agree on all that stuff. But I do think, broadly speaking, pretty much everybody can agree that there is a line somewhere. Even if we can't agree where it is, there is a line somewhere that some things, some material, some entertainment, some art are something that children should not be exposed to. And the reason that you don't expose children to this is not because of some blanket moral, because it's bad. Well, if you're media literate, it's not that anyway. But you can still say don't expose children to that because it is dealing with things, be it visuals, be it concepts, be it relationships, be it whatever. It is dealing with things that require a certain amount of life experience and adult understanding to be able to process safely. And if you give that material to someone who doesn't have that background, which children absolutely wouldn't, then you run the risk of traumatizing them with the material itself, or possibly leaving them in a situation where they take away awful lessons and terrible ideas because they don't understand the greater context in which this thing exists. And I think it's the same, at least potentially, with a big chunk of the mainstream fans of 50 Shades of Grey. And yes, I realize I did just compare fans of 50 Shades of Grey to literal children. And I understand that that sounds belittling, but I want you to really think about it. People who read that book, who had no understanding of what BDSM is, what the practice of it looks like, how to engage with it safely, how to tell if you are instead in a situation where you are not engaged in kink, you are engaged in abuse masquerading as kink. You give it to an audience with no background in any of that, and they might just think it's sexy. They might just come away from it going, oh, I want something like that. And again, you can read it and find it enticing, but a healthy reading of that work should be, no matter how it makes you feel to engage with it, the reading should be, I don't want that for myself, though. Which, for the record, you're allowed to do, and especially within the context of kink conversations, is kind of at the heart of a lot of it. Minor divergence on this, but it's really important to understand that kink is not the equivalent to the real world events that kink is simulating. So, to bring it back to rope, you can simulate being restrained, being restricted, being tied to a chair as if you were kidnapped. But to do it within a kink dynamic and a kink setting means that you are engaged in it safely and can exit that situation at any point. But by simulating that, you can engage with those desires, those wants. You can fulfill those needs by simulating the thing so that you can have those sensations. Think of it like a roller coaster. What's that first drop on a real high roller coaster like? It feels like you're free falling. You're not. You're safely strapped in and you're absolutely okay. But you feel like you're in danger. But the reason you're willing to engage with that danger is because you know you are, in fact, safe. If you enjoy a roller coaster and that sensation of that first drop, that does not mean you are going to throw yourself off a building in search of it. You engage with it in that way because it gives you that thrill in a safe environment. That is what good kink practice is for. It is engaging with the desire that could be engaged with in a very harmful way, but instead giving it a safe place to exist. That's the purpose of all of this. Because even taking kink out of the equation and just the simple desire for sex at all, just the very nature of basic lust, could lead you to engage in harmful activities and bad habits and bad practices with people who are unsafe. Because you have a desire that you want to be fulfilled. But you need to find ways to engage with and fulfill that desire safely rather than just running out with whatever the first opportunity you can find is, because that is how you get into a dangerous situation. Kink is the same thing. But again, if you don't know that, if you don't understand that, if you don't realize what the purpose of all the safety is, what the purpose of community is, what the purpose of safe words are, what the purpose of negotiations are, what the purpose of aftercare is, because Christian doesn't do that either. If you don't understand why all that is there and you just see the quote unquote kinky fuckery of 50 Shades of Grey with no basis of knowledge for understanding the context in which that should exist in real practice, then you run the risk of coming to conclusions that might harm you. Is it definitely going to happen? No, of course not. But it is a risk. That's the problem with 50 Shades of Grey. The fact that it went mainstream. Of course, if it was going to be successful at all, it had to go mainstream because, as I said, BDSM circles don't like it by and large. So the people who understand it well enough to recognize it as bad practice don't engage with it. So if it was going to be successful at all, this was the only way it was going to be. It was never going to be successful within the niche it's actually trying to depict, which is actually shockingly common with a lot of niche media that engages in niche subcultures when it's written by people who have no actual experience in those subcultures. you will very frequently find that the people who it's depicting actually don't like it because it depicts them badly. But it is successful because it is sold to an audience that doesn't know better. That, more than anything, is what the success of 50 Shades of Grey represents. It represents the success of marketing to people who don't know enough about what it is you're giving them to realize that it's bad. 50 Shades of Grey is a cheap hot dog served to people who have never had meat before. I gotta stop making food comparisons. I do that more than I should, but sometimes it just kind of fits. Target audiences matter, and not just for the sake of success. Like in the case of something like 50 Shades of Grey, it was incredibly successful because it was sold to an audience who probably should not have been engaging with it. 50 Shades of Grey, personally, I'm of the opinion that it has a right to exist. It's fine that it exists. I don't like it, but it's fine that it exists. What it shouldn't be, though, is it should not be anybody's point of entry into kink and BDSM. It is an atrocious and potentially harmful first touchstone into that world. And if you want a much better introduction to BDSM concepts, I would strongly recommend the movie Secretary. That is probably still the best depiction that I have seen of BDSM. Don't bother with that Nicole Kidman movie from a couple years ago, Baby Girl or whatever it was. That one's trash too. And honestly, for many of the same reasons that 50 Shades of Grey is trash. I actually reviewed that over on my secondary channel, and I think I even opened the video by saying, you know, one of these days, one of these movies is going to be made by someone who actually understands kink dynamics, and I look forward to that day. But it wasn't that. I just kind of wanted to add this extra layer in the conversation with things like how your media diet doesn't reflect your morals. It's okay to engage with problematic material, but let's be honest, not all audiences should be engaging with all material. Because sometimes just because you don't know what you don't know, there are some things that the only way you're going to be able to engage with this safely is if you know enough about it to be able to distinguish what is and is not a depiction that is worth emulating or aspiring to. And if you don't know and you can't tell, maybe that's not a piece of work you should be engaging with yet. And that's not me being like, ban 50 Shades of Grey. No, I don't recommend it, reading it or watching it. But as I said, it has a right to exist. But the reason it's troubling is because it landed in the laps of people who didn't understand the world that it was trying to depict. And as a result, it had the risk of instilling a lot of very bad and dangerous practices and ideas and dynamics into people who thought, ooh, this sounds kind of fun. And that is the real problem. Not the book, but who it was sold to. Anyways, I just wanted to share those thoughts, and hopefully you found them interesting. Like I said, I'm very late to this conversation, but maybe it's worth it anyways. Who knows? Videos tend to tank around this time of year anyway, so I'm just rolling the dice on it. But whatever your thoughts are on any of this, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. They all help. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Zubin Lafula, Auntie Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Oliver B, Mystic Shadow, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Pickapok, Becky Sparks, Ulrich, Twilord, Tracy Scrabbit, Palber, Rabajoggle, Cindy Ella, Sir Didymus is my favorite, and thanking some random folks from my lower tiers of support. Thank you, Pippa Barwell, Mandy Walla, and Jessica, the Trans Metal Alchemist. The boys are back, and we've got a new one here. We have Navarro has joined the mischief. Okay, so that's just what we're doing now. All right.